Hey, everybody. It's really good to be back this week. Hey, Destiny.
Hey Lee, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. We're making it.
We
Just,
are.
just one day at a time,
Mm-hmm.
one day at a time. But it's exciting to see you. And it's exciting this is the second episode of season two. So we are very excited about that. And we have a great show coming up. And we have just a great lineup this season.
We do. We
Yeah,
do.
we really do. It's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to put out all of that soon, so everybody stay tuned to see the lineup this season. We're not going to go as long as we did last time because it was very long. It was probably two seasons wrapped up into one. So we won't be doing that, but we'll be coming to you at least for a good little while. So yeah, just stay tuned for that. But we are excited for this episode to talk about white Jesus, dismantling the white Jesus, which we don't normally talk about
Um,
enough.
I mean, we reference white Jesus, but we don't really unpack it the way that we're going to tonight. So
Yes.
I'm excited.
I'm excited too. And I think Destiny is going to introduce our guest.
Oh, okay. Bring on our guest.
So we are going to bring on our guest. We are very excited. And there is Jessica.
Whoop, whoop. So tonight, as you can see, we have a USA favorite with us. We have Jessica Vazquez Torres, who is basically like an idol. Basically, I mean, it is what it is. Everyone loves you. They know your great work. I feel like you need no introduction. But for those who might not be in the Presby realm or, might not be extended in your touch, because I know you go across denominations and sectors and nonprofits, just introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about you, Jess, before we dive into our topic.
So, what is there to know about me? Well, so a couple things. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I'm coming from. I'm neighbors over here with Lee. And even though we've never actually met because, global pandemics kind of make it hard to meet your neighbors. Um, and I'm a national program director for Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. I have been doing anti-racism facilitation and consulting and training out for about 22 years or something like that. And 21 years, something like that. I don't know. I'm too old to remember. But I'm a Presbyterian, member of the Presbyterian Church. And yeah, I live with my spouse, Laura. And yeah, that's good things. I'm Puerto Rican, which is the most important thing you to remember about me. And for Lee and for Destiny, I wore a jacket today over my running tights, my shorts, and my T-shirt. I just threw on a jacket and a pocket square, thinking I felt like I was coming into a big event here. I feel like I'm very honored to be here today. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation about this dude named the White Jesus. It's just annoying guy. This annoying guy.
Yeah. And we're so grateful that you're here. Yeah. So grateful.
For our YAV alums who know you through your Crossroads work, I'm just going to ask the question before Lee dives into white Jesus. What shoes are you wearing today, Jess? Did you?
I did not. I did not get on. However, if I were to be wearing shoes today, I'm currently barefoot because we don't wear shoes in the house. But if I were to be wearing shoes, I'd be wearing my blue and yellow Swedish sneakers I have that I love and totally match my outfit. So that's what I'd be wearing, Yabalams. It'd be sneakers, white, yellow, and dark blue. Maybe they'll make like a appearance on the side, like we can put them up.
Yeah, little special effect. Love it. I love it. Well, yeah. So we'll just dive in and talk about this white Jesus. And for those people who are watching, we have people watching on Facebook. We have people watching on Twitter. and we have people watching on YouTube. So there's no telling the dynamic of this audience whatsoever, especially on Twitter. So I will ask, for those unfamiliar, when we say the white Jesus, I wonder if we could kind of describe what that is and why that is important to distinguish, because we've already had a comment on Twitter saying, why is this important? Why is talking about white Jesus important?
So a couple of reasons, right? Let's just go ahead and ask the why it matters first, right? And then we'll introduce why Jesus. So I think why it matters is that in the context of Christianity, right, what we essentially have said is that Jesus is an incarnation of the divine, right? That Jesus is God in human form, walking about the earth, in a way that makes the divine God accessible and know our life, like have a sense of that kind of something called the incarnation. And so it really matters that we accurately depict the incarnation of Jesus. Because if what we're saying is that Jesus comes and takes some material, real form, then one can deduce from there that if his incarnation is that of a Palestinian Jew, and that we do know what Palestinian Jews look like, then it's not possible for Jesus to be Swedish and have long blonde locks and blue eyes, right? Like now we know that somewhere along the way, our imagination has become corrupted and tainted. And therefore, then this incarnation, this material reconstruction of Jesus is actually incorrect and serves a different purpose. So it actually does matter a lot. It also matters because if Jesus, in the context of Christianity, if Jesus is one of the ways in which we have access to the divine, right? If Jesus is quote unquote our Savior, the Son of God, part of the Holy Trinity, then it matters that we can see as accurate a reflection of that as a way of challenging prevailing dominant ideas and dominant anthropologies, dominant understandings of what human beings are superior or not, who and what is reflecting of the divine. And I think it matters because in a time when white supremacy as an ideology, right, when continues to rear its ugly head. It's not as if white supremacy ever stopped. It's that we are in this latest rearing. It's like Godzilla, right? Every once in a while it shows up. Like it shows up in a way that we can't ignore it. It's constantly showing up. If you're a person of color, you know that it's there. But we are all suddenly confronted with the Godzilla version of that. Then it matters to have a sense that in whose name we are operating, in whose name we are acting, in whose name those of us who are Christian are decrying, then maybe we ought to interrogate exactly what that being actually looks like in a more accurate and historically accurate way. So I think it matters for all those reasons. Now, who is this Jesus? That depends on it depends on where you ask and where you start, right? So we should know that it begins to evolve around the Renaissance, right? 15th, 16th century, and that we begin to move out of a place of iconography and to canvassing and painting. And now you have this period where you have people like Michelangelo, you have people like Leonardo da Vinci, who are creating images and like anthropomorphical images of man, right? Think of David. And that begins to influence how we imagine human beings, right? And because Europeans are both, at this time, fairly insular and parochial and only see each other as the people who ought to reflect the world, they paint who they see. They paint themselves. And so you begin to see this sort of morphing of people's imagination into painting, and into see that at a time also when people are encountering difference, are beginning to worldwide colonial expansion, begin to see others, Right now, it's also important to remember that there's also, I think, there's also what we would call today white supremacy. There is a way in which forms of the roots of that ideology are beginning to emerge, right? Ideas about Europeans being superior to notions of lightness and darkness. You begin, there's a famous painting baby Jesus, right? And it's called the adoration of the babe, I think is what it's called. And you see this, the magi are there, and each of the magi is reflecting of an ethnic group. You can see it in the painting. And there's baby Jesus in the middle, blue-eyed and super fair skin. And then we can fast forward and look at the painting. The painting, it's called the Supper at Emmaus by this guy named Leon Augustin Le Hermite. And Jesus is a white guy. And that's a 1892 painting, right? Like, he is a white guy. But that's actually not the white Jesus we are most familiar with. The white Jesus we are most familiar with, the one that is in most of our churches, is a painting of Jesus from the 1940s called The Head of Christ by Warner Salmon. I mean, if you're in Google, go ahead and Google that up. You'll know what I mean. He is looking like a school picture because Salmon wanted to make it relatable. So he looks like he's in one of those school portraits, right? He's got a soft light around him, long black hairs. He's wearing like a white smock. And he is this totally peaceful, unfocused eyes. That picture has been reproduced 500 million times since he was painted. It is the picture of Jesus that I have seen the most. And we can put it up. Yep, there it is. That is the picture of Jesus. That's the Jesus we are most familiar with. That's the Jesus in every church, prayer cards. It's global in its manifestation, and it is completely ahistorical. In no ways reflects what Jesus looks like. This is the white Jesus we know. And this white Jesus is problematic. And this white Jesus is a figment of white imagination, right? So that's the Jesus we're going to be talking about, that imagination of that Jesus.
Thank you, Jess, for kind of giving us that history of how white Jesus came about. I didn't know exactly how they came up with white Jesus, but this was helpful. Now, I mean, it's helpful. I'm not going to go into details because I know you're going to bring it out. But I would like to ask you, what do we lose as people of faith lifting up this ideology of white Jesus? You taught us how we got here, but not naming that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. And now we have this, this life touch portrait.
I know. He looks like a Lifetime movie actor.
Right. What do we lose by recognizing white Jesus?
So I think we lose a number of things, right? I mean, we lose the reality of Jesus's existence, right? If Jesus is a Palestinian Jew who traveled about, who for all intended purposes appeared to have been unhoused, right? Moving about as an itinerant preacher, we lose that he was existed in a culture, operating in a people. We lose that he existed as an occupied being, right? Moving through about a time of Roman occupation of the lands in which he was born and where he operated, and a Roman occupation that in many ways had co-opted and corrupted some of the ways of his religious community. We miss that he wasn't a Christian, right? That Jesus was a Jew, and that as such isn't necessarily setting out to create Christianity, that Jesus is setting out to do what most of us who today call ourselves Christians and are hoping for something more from our own communities. He was trying to call its people back, its religious authorities back to some kind of integrity around its own values. We miss that he wasn't a Christian at all. We also miss that he that he was dark skinned, that he didn't have blue eyes, that he was, depending on how you want to conceive of a Palestinian Jew born in the north of Africa, or what we would think of today as the north of Africa, because, Palestine is a part of the continent of Africa, that he is an African, right? By virtue of his continent, by virtue of the land he is coming in, and that in many ways, even our imagination of a Middle East is the product of white supremacy, the ways that we subdivided and reconstructed the map of that continent as a result of white colonial incursion. And the ways that white supremacy in its extractive ways reorganize land. We also miss why Jesus's words, why Jesus's challenges of the law are not about compassion and service and niceness, but they are in fact political acts, right? Of a person from the periphery of his community, engaging in behavior that challenges the authorities, from its taxation system to its system of recognition of the vulnerable, to the ways that he challenges the ways in which food is distributed, where people have access to healing, right? Who has access to water when, right? So we're not just missing Jesus's material reality and his context. We're also missing why what he did wasn't simply about being a nice guy, but that in fact he would be today maybe considered a dangerous person in the ways that he's challenging the prevailing authority that is occupying his land. So I think we miss all of that. We miss all of that when this is what we turn Jesus into.
Yeah, and I'm also reminded, and this really makes me go into like how it is reflected now, and I see it. I mean, we all hopefully all saw what happened at the Capitol, the insurrection, basically domestic terrorism, but in the name of Jesus, in the name, like Jesus saves was there, and like there are pictures around with Jesus, white Jesus, draped in the American flag, and now it's both white Jesus and Americanism, and I wonder the connection in that kind of smushing together, because in many churches I know and that I grew up in, they had that picture of Jesus, but also there was an American flag on the chancel. There's also this very connectedness to Jesus in that way, in this context. So I wonder if to expand on that a little bit too, because I think that's
totally. Yeah. So I think I wanna take one step back and add something to switch the question that Destiny asked as a way of answering your question, Lee, because I think it's not just what we miss as Christians when this is our Jesus. I think the other side of that question is, what does having this embodiment, this image of Jesus justifies? What is it that this Jesus gives permission to, for Christians in the ways that we operate and have operated in the United States, right? And I think that that's where we don't often explore that side of the question. And I think what this Jesus grants permission to is enslavement. What this Jesus lends permission to is a kind of passivity that says, let's just all be nice. What this Jesus gives permission to is forms of supersessionism that said, right, that we Christians in the United States replace Israel as the people of God with whom God has a covenant, biblical Israel. And that therefore we now get to have this land, and this is our promised land, right? And we also miss that ahead of this Jesus, right, from Salmon, there's a movement in England in the 19th century called muscular Christianity that Theodore Roosevelt was very much a practitioner of. This belief that Jesus wouldn't be weak and passive and sitting around with children, but that Jesus was sports-like, that he was strong and virile and masculine. and that Jesus wouldn't be weak and feminine. And so we also, when you think about 19th century, right, you think about Roosevelt, you think about 19th century, you think about muscular Christianity, and then you overlaid into that ideas of like manifest destiny, right? And this whole notion of go west, young men, right? In the name of Jesus, we stake out claims all over the indigenous land that doesn't belong to us because God told us to, right? So this Jesus, this white Jesus, justifies all kinds of taking of land, genocide, destruction of culture, enslavement of people, the lynching of bodies. Because if this Jesus is the image of God, then all those other people are not the image of God, right? They can't be. And if they are, it's because they are lesser versions of the image of God, right? I was listening today to a podcast and talking about, preachers like Mather that believe that, sure, we need everyone to have Jesus and we need everyone to be converted, including the enslaved person against their will, because we believe that, Cotton Mather used to believe that when they converted to Christianity, their soul became white, right? So that this notion of this Jesus offers a justification for all of that. And this Jesus also tells people who look like me, who look like destiny, right, that we don't get to be a reflection of the Creator. And so it's both what it has us missing and what it imposes upon us. Now, to your question, Lee, I think that what happens in the US is that we begin to see this integration in our story, in our evolving, in our origin story as a nation that pulls together this destructive and corrupting, I would even call them evil strands of metaphor, right? One is this notion that we are a Christian nation, that we have been blessed by God to take civilization forward, right? So the embodiment of God in that movement is a Jesus that looks like this, right? The second strand of that is that if that is true, then we are exceptional, which means that by virtue of this Jesus, the things that we do here, however we act in the name of that Jesus, can be accepted and forgiven, right? Can be seen as legitimate, and in fact, theologically acceptable. And I think that third strand that it does in this Americanism of ours is that it says if we have been selected by God to be the new manifestation, the new covenant people, and if this God is only our God and this is only our Jesus, then the things that are done under this flag equal the church, right? That this flag isn't just the flag of a nation. This flag is the flag of a nation chosen by God, represented by this embodiment. Now, we may not hold all of that consciously, right? We may not have all of that in our head, all formulated the way I just laid it out, but that's how it gets lived out. So when you see people storming the Capitol, right, and there you see the flag of the Crusades, the red cross on the white background, it tells you that there is something deeply, deeply corrupted about the ways that American Christianity has allowed itself, has evolved over time, has been used in order to justify white supremacy. Because it's not that we shouldn't rebel against oppression, is that was not a rebellion against oppression. That was a rebellion for repression, for the right to repress those who are not like God, don't reflect the image of God according to the worldview held by those people. So you see how it all gets twisted together, all wrapped in a political project of which Christianity is part and of which this Jesus, right, has been its standard bearer.
Yeah, that was a lot. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, whew. I should have put on the collar because you preaching tonight.
Oh, darn it.
You named it American Christianity. and then previously how you kind of gave us like the world behind this biblical text about Jesus' actual life and not this fabrication that American Christians make up. And well, I guess I have a twofold question, but I'll ask the one later on because we can wrap up with that one. But knowing that people just disregarded part of Jesus' narrative and, didn't actually take the time to realize that Jesus is a Palestinian Jew. How can we move as a country to reconcile and deconstruct white Jesus? What is I know you're doing some of the work, but how do we move forward?
This is where I actually think in many ways, we are at a point where what's at stake for those of us who call ourselves Christians is the very soul of the church. I don't mean to be fatalistic about this. I do mean this seriously. We need an exorcism. And we need an exorcism that gets this Jesus out of our imagination. Because what this Jesus is attached to, the worldview, the forces that lead to its painting, right? And every painting that it precedes it, and every painting that will follow it. It's a worldview that says that there is only one embodiment of the Creator. And that not only is there only one embodiment, but that embodiment, by virtue of being white and male and cisgender, and able-bodied, is in fact superior to and sits above all other forms of the incarnation of the divine. And so there is a need to exorcise this Jesus from our midst. And it's really hard because our stained glass windows in our churches are full of images that depict some white Jesus. The pictures in our sanctuaries and our halls, but also the kind of Jesus that it exists in our imagination. I don't know if you've seen that YouTube video of the guy that's praying. And he says, he's praying, he's at church and he's praying to Jesus. And this black Jesus shows up and says, "You called for me." And he goes, no, I don't know who you are. You're confused. I called for Jesus. And the guy says, the black Jesus says, "But I am Jesus." He's like, no, that's not possible. You can't be Jesus. He's like, "Yeah, but I am. I assure you, I am totally Jesus. Like, I'm telling you, I'm Jesus." And the guy says, no, wait a minute. He pulls out his wallet and he shows him this card and he says, "I'm looking for this guy. I need this guy to help me." And I think that what that says to me is that as long as the church is looking to meet the needs, to attract this guy, to be accountable to this guy, to be operating in the name of this guy, it's gonna miss all of the forms in which the divine comes to us, in all of its diversity, in all of the ways that it shows up in the universe. And so I think that we need an exorcism. We need to start naming it for what it is, which is not to say we get rid of it completely, is we put it in context. We say this Jesus was created for this reason. It evolved at this period of time. Here is how it was used. Here is how it's been misused. And these are other Jesuses. And let's talk about these other incarnations of Jesus. And why is it being depicted in these ways? It isn't always about getting rid of, but it is about beginning to contend and beginning to critically assess what this has meant for us and what it does and offers us. But short of an exorcism, I think that we have to.
Yeah, and I love that specifically because now the lectionary is taking us into Mark, which is my favorite gospel, because it does talk a lot about exorcism, and I was always fascinated by that growing up. But it's also something, and I've had a conversation specifically in progressive, whatever that means, circles, that when you start talking about evil, when you start talking about exorcism, when you start talking about that there is this evil within these systems, that many, and this is me talking to progressive Christians out there that are probably listening to this, I think there's a little uncomfortability in that. There's also a little uncomfortability in messing with people's Jesus. So I wonder where that uncomfort and that line of like uncomfortability comes from, because within conservative Christianity and progressive Christianity, there's only a certain line you can cross until people's like, hold on, I'm a little too uncomfortable with that. Now you're messing with my Jesus and you're messing with my comfortableness.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if we can elaborate on this, like, because I see it all over Christianity, this uncomfortableness when you start talking about that.
Yeah. So there's, let me say, maybe two things, maybe three. Me, people training seminary, I learned to talk in threes. I think the first I would say is that, a hallmark of white American Christianity, because I think you do have to say it is about white and not even American. I'm going to say a hallmark of white United Station Christianity, because America is an entire continent. It's comfort, right? It's this idea of a passive Jesus that makes me feel comfortable. Shepherd walks with me. The shepherd intercedes for me. It doesn't challenge me in any way. And in the narrative of Jesus, positioning us not as the owners and the administrators of the temple, but always assuming that we are on Jesus's side, right? That we are not the ones whose tables are being upturned. And so whenever you start messing with Jesus, part of that is in part because you're messing with people's with I think the incorrect ways that we have framed and articulated Jesus to the world, certainly even the biblical Jesus. I think second, part of that comfort that we so desperately cling to in white Christianity of the United States is also resting upon an idea of innocence, right? That the white Christian church is innocent, is good. That's why I think Make America Great Again was so incredibly attractive to so many, is this notion we're not responsible. We are the good ones. We've always been the good ones. Let's be superior, right? Let's be awesome again. As opposed to the call to face the ways in which we are in fact not awesome and have never been for a lot of people. And so there's a piece in there about the confrontation that we are not that innocent and that we are much more culpable than certainly the Christianity, white Christianity that many of us profess, which is not limited to white churches. Plenty of people of color congregations adhere to white Christianity because it's colonial Christianity. It's what all of us got when we were colonized, right? So there's a way in which the white Christianity we adhere to makes it necessary for us to be innocent. And so you start messing with Jesus and you start thinking about this Jesus we worship as complicit, then we are complicit. And that's untenable, right? That's nothing we can consider. And then I think the third piece about this that is really hard, it's now turning to the question of evil. And I think in progressive Christianity, I was talking to one of my colleagues this week about this, that in progressive Christianity, we made a decision somewhere along the way. Probably, I'm going to put a date on the board, right? I'm going to say somewhere in the late 70s and 80s, to when confronted by the religious right and its claiming of a moral stance, a moral location, progressive Christianity simply abandoned it. Right. And so you see the ways that progressive politics, progressive organizing simply lets go of ideas around spirituality and religiosity and Christianity. I mean, which is amazing considering that Dr. King was a Southern Baptist preacher, right? And yet we held him. Abraham Joshua Heschel, and right, all these religious leaders, all these people of faith that we call as our giants of social justice work, we strip them. Dr. King ceases to be a pastor. And so there's a way in which we in the progressive community, the Christian progressive community, let go of that place of moral dialogue. And we also abandon the language of evil and sin. And we don't have a comfort level with it. Now, I didn't grow up. I grew up in a version of white Christianity in a Puerto Rican community that was deeply influenced by Pentecostalism and charismatic movements. And so we talked about evil, and we believe evil and the devil to be real, to have power, to have that power be manifest. And that our job was to call out evil. Right now, I went to seminary, and then I decided intellectually that was a bunch of BS. And so then I stopped believing it. But I'm also clear the older I get that there is something to be said for the framework of evil, to understand what happens in the world that separates us and drive us to diminish the humanity of other people. And there, to me, there is no other way, the other language for that, the language of evil and sin. And so if we cannot arrive at a comfort level with that, then why get baptized? Right? We get baptized to renounce evil. Why get ordained as an elder or as a pastor if we are not going to renounce evil? Right? Like, why get power from on high by the Holy Spirit if we are not going to renounce evil? Right? Then it feels like it's a waste, this business of being a Christian, if we're just simply going to allow evil to remain unnamed when we see it. And we're not, I think that sometimes we confuse our role as Christians in the church, in the world, and we turn ourselves into social scientists, into political scientists and social workers, and we can throw down theory with everyone else. But the thing that we leave out is the thing that we are actually called to do, which is to bring God talk into the issues of the world. That's what theology is to talk about God. And we leave that at the edge, and we leave evil at the edge. And then what is then our reason for existing? Again, what's at stake is the soul of the church, I think. And so if we can't figure this out, then maybe there shouldn't be a church. At least not in its current form.
Dropping the truth right there. That's something to think about. That's something to think about.
Yeah.
Amen. You touched upon it a second ago, talking about people of color believing in white Jesus, and I want you to expound upon that a little more. What do people? Why do people of color in today's society continue to believe and lean on and call on the name of white Jesus? And what do we gain or lose by believing in white Jesus?
Whew. So one of the things about colonialism, right, the imposition, and it's the ways that it imposes an imaginary, a framework of metaphor, of language, of image upon those who it colonizes, right? That one of the functions of colonialism, it's to, by using cultural means and methods, is to destroy the ways that the colonized views the world, and to replace it by what it imposes, not to be liberatory, but to control, right? And so that when Christianity arrives into the lives of so many of us who were not born white, who were not structured politically to be white, it comes connected to colonial means, right? It comes through plantation imposition. It comes through indigenous boarding schools where Christianity is a weapon, right? To kill you in order to save you, right? It comes through missionary movements. It comes through NGO politics that are disguised that disguise the actual Christian intent that's coming from the United States, often in Europe. And so you get this Christianity that may misuse narratives, right, from your own culture and your own people as a way of conveying an indigenized version of Christianity, but for the purpose of controlling the population, right? It's really not about liberation or freedom or any kind of self-determining act. And so what happens is that, maybe the first and the second generation remember that, experience that, but the people who resisted get stamped out, get moved out, get removed, get put in their place. And then you get 5 and 6 generations from that moment, and no one remembers that. And what they remember is that this faith that they have adhered to, this Jesus that they have come to know intimately, helped them endure and survive. And so that our emotional connection, it's to the kind of gospel that we discovered, and to the gospel that has helped us endure what are, terrible evil and oppression, which also means that we are not always critically assessing what that has required of us, what we have bought into because of our adherence to that Jesus. And it's interesting to see the resistance among communities of color to more, to images of Jesus, right, that more accurately or more powerfully reflect the people. Right? King used to say that spending a lot of time, trying to build on the anthropology of Jesus wasn't going to get anywhere in a good place, right? Because what are we going to gain from that? And I appreciate this desire to say, well, Jesus is Jesus. What does it matter that his color wasn't the color that I can imagine it? Well, we already talked about that. It actually matters to understand people in their context. But second, the reality is that most of what we have of Jesus is our imagination of Jesus, right? There are not pictures. Regardless of what the Shroud of Turin, which was eventually, right? I don't know if you all remember. I'm old enough to remember the Shroud of Turin. Turned out to be a hoax. That what we know is that all that we have of Jesus is what our imagination allows us to create, right? And so Jesus, in many ways, can be anything. Jesus could be female. Jesus could be dark skin. Jesus is likely, historically speaking, right, geographically speaking, dark and not long hair and not straight hair. And so, at a minimum, we could honor its potential material reality based on what we know about the place of the world that we live in. What I think it's hard for those of us who are people of color is that would require digging deeply, really deeply, to incisively dissect how much of that white Jesus we have inside of us. It really would require risking having to confront the fact that we have bought much more and have bought into much more of the ideas of what that Jesus, white Jesus, embodies, that we are willing to own. And so to suddenly change his image, is to then have to let go of that, right? And this Jesus is all about capitalism, right? This Jesus is all about upward mobility. This Jesus is all about the American dream. And then if I bought into that, then I'm going to have to confront that. And what does it mean? And can I follow, as a person of color, a Black Jesus, right? Can I really follow a Black Jesus that may not be able-bodied, that may not be male, that may be trans, right? Can I follow some other embodiment that isn't some virile, white, model-like, able-bodied, cisgender, blonde, blue-eyed guy? And what does it reveal about us that we have that attachment? And I think that's a conversation that is incredibly difficult to have in communities of color, because all too often we're too busy surviving what the followers of this Jesus are doing to us, right? Like, and so who has time to contemplate our own buying when the followers of this Jesus might in fact be trying to kill us? So, in the frame of theological discussion priorities, not at the top of the list. And yet I think we are going to have to, because of what we are doing to people in our communities, the ways that we are, adhering into forms of transphobia and homophobia, of colorism, of capitalism, that this white Jesus justifies, that our communities too are in fact going to have to do some soul searching around.
We have
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go to the chat. Jessica.
So we have a comment in the chat. Well, not a comment, a question, but
a question. But on this topic, because you mentioned a Jesus of different gender, and I think talking about that intersection as well is really important in this conversation too, because like as you said before, this masculine, muscular. I worked at a place where we got a call because it was a publishing place. I'm not going to say what, but that the image of Jesus was not masculine enough that we used on the cover. There wasn't enough hair on Jesus's legs was a comment. There wasn't it wasn't masculine enough. And I wonder about the impact of a very muscular, chiseled, physique like image. How has that affected the body images of people? How has that affected the gender expressions of people? Because it is such a powerful image when you are indoctrinated in this, to see something that is quote perfect, both physically, like sexuality, like all these things of perfectionism within this image. And I wonder about that too, how that affects our own embodiments and our own images of ourselves.
Yeah, I when I was prepping for today, I found this quote from this it's a Kentucky-based painter that in many ways is a kind of manifestation in 2020 of the masculine Jesus of England of the 19th century. His name is Sawyer. He's a painter of Jesus, and he says this quote. The quote has a profanity word. I just want to let you know that up front. It's not a super terrible one, but just want to highlight that. And what I'll do is I'm gonna spell it out. I scarcely think Jesus could have overturned the tables of the money lenders and driven them from the temple if he was a wimp. The model I use for my paintings is a surfer guy who's built like a brick house. And you can, he doesn't just say brick house. And so, right, so here's a guy who makes a living constructing images of Jesus. And for him, the idea that a Jesus that's quote unquote wimp, limpy, like tiny or small or unmuscular could do all of the acts that Jesus did, that's inconceivable, because that's the work of real men, real masculine surfer men, right? And so I there's a couple of things that I think you're pointing out, Lee, that I are worth interrogating. If you're a religious leader, like in which ways are we layering our articulations of Jesus with presumptions of heterosexuality, of cisgenderness, of able-bodiedness? We may not be naming it. We may not be saying it. I am intending to present and articulate Jesus in this way. But how may be by not interrogating our own buying, our own investment in those ideas, in fact, communicate a Jesus that is a version of Ken from the Barbie and Ken world, with Mary Magdalene as the Barbie, right? Like, how do we know that the person sitting in the pew at the other side of Zoom, who is seeking to and struggling to see themselves as a reflection of the Creator, isn't hearing us and describing us and our pronoun uses for Jesus and our ways of depicting Jesus are not in fact finding in Jesus someone so unrelatable that they cannot in fact see the divine in themselves, because they don't reflect this image and this construction. And so if we really do not know what Jesus looked like, and if we can presume that he was dark-skinned, if we can presume that as a guy who lived most of his life outside, his body would show the impact of life outside. If he walked all the time, and that his feet would show the impact of that kind of transient life, his body would show the impact of exposure to weather and to the sun, then we're not talking about somebody who's a model. We're talking about somebody who lived a life that had impact upon themselves and upon their embodiment. And to talk about it otherwise is to then create an image that no one can see themselves in, if Jesus is intended Jesus invites us to imagine the divine in us, then this Jesus doesn't do that. It tells me I actually do not belong because I will never approximate it. And it's destructive and it's damaging and it's harmful.
We want to go to the chat. We have a lot of comments, but we did actually have a question that was lifted up by Lauren and Peter Sanders. It says, when white folks want to renounce white Jesus, how important is remembering Christianity's oppressive use?
Yes. Thank you. And hello, Lauren Sanders. Lauren is a friend, so I want to just take this moment, give Lauren a shout out and Peter. Extremely important, Lauren, is what I would say. I think it's too easy for a bunch of white Christians in the United States to suddenly say, let's get rid of all the pictures and replace them with a rainbow of different embodiments and images of Jesus, right? That's not going to fly, because that's just performativity, right? That's not really understanding and doing the hard work of dismantling, of tearing out, of uprooting what the values that the white Jesus came from. Values that are still very much a part of white Christianity and white United States Christianity in particular. And so, no, it isn't enough to just replace it. The task of uprooting what this Jesus represents is the task of coming to terms and of, I've heard the co-moderator of the Presbyterian Church USA, Elona Street Stewart, say, it is going to require a moral reckoning for us to really have to confront what this white Jesus has caused us to be silenced around, caused us to support, caused us to justify, caused us to look the other way upon. So no, it isn't enough. If a white community really is willing to renounce this white Jesus, is really willing to do the work, then it has to begin to do the work of looking at what is it that this white Jesus legitimized in their life of ministry, and what harm did it create? Not just, but it did good things in spite of. As a person who's colonized and who had a bunch of missionaries, two different sets of missionaries, Catholic ones and Protestant ones, invade my island. I tire of hearing people say to me, but the gospel of Jesus got there, right? Like, it wasn't all that bad. And I am like, I'd rather have self-determination. So no, it was that bad. And just because good things came out of it, it doesn't justify the impact. The outcome doesn't justify the impact and the destruction that was created on its wake. And so, yeah, people are going to have to be willing to have the moral reckoning of facing and confronting what following this white Jesus allowed them and caused them to actually say was divine and God ordained, when maybe it was just really evil. And that's not an easy path, and yet that is the necessary path, I think, of the Christian life in the United States.
Amen to that. And we are we have about 7 minutes left of our time together, but we did want to offer a moment for any last minute comments that all ears that are burning shall hear, that you would like to offer us, Jessica.
And also maybe any resources for people who are watching via Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, who might think what you're saying is complete BS, that you made a Palestinian Jew Jesus, So we like to educate people.
We got to do that, right? So there is actually a really good documentary. I can't remember if it's on Amazon Prime or Netflix, called The White Jesus, or the White Savior. It's a really good it basically investigation of how this white Jesus emerges and its history. There are, in fact, the last 6 months, there's been a number of articles. The Guardian has one that kind of talks to religious scholars about the evolution of the white Jesus. There are folks that like Willie James Jennings, The Christian Imagination. Maybe it's a theological book, but it's actually a beautiful written book that has won a writing award. It's so pretty. That thank you on Netflix. Yes, for Chewy7885 for finding out where it was. It's a beautiful book that helps us understand the imagination that produces such a white Jesus, right? Because I think that's the thing. It's not so much that Jesus is white or not. Like, right, in many ways, people reflect and construct images, right? And that's part of the struggle of the Renaissance, this idea of, can I make this divine being look like me? So there's a part of me that understands that kind of narcissistic impulse to reflect ourselves towards the divine and have the divine look like us. The real challenge of the white Jesus is the imagination that produces it, is the set of metaphors and ideologies that give it breath and power. And that's what I think we have to understand. Because that then, if we understand that, then the white Jesus doesn't have to be supreme and centered and the only one. The white Jesus could be one community's effort at given, of given an anthropomorphic view of themselves and the divine. And then they can argue and talk and dialogue with other communities that are also doing the same thing. But that's not the issue, the real issue. And this is maybe the word that I want to leave people with. The real issue is we need to understand the ideology that produces the white Jesus. We need to understand the thinking that generates it. And so I find that people like Willie James Jennings writing about the imagination, the Christian imagination, I think it's really helpful and really useful for us to think about, right? To help us really struggle with that way of thinking and that way of viewing. I think people like Bind Deloria, God is Red, again, really pushing as an indigenous person and the son of a minister, right? A Christian, an Episcopal, really thinking about, as an indigenous person, what is this Jesus that we got? How did this Jesus harm us, right? I think that those are people that help us understand the ideology more than the picture. What else we got? I have a question for the two of you, right? Like, I want to turn the tables. So I think the 2 minutes that we have remaining, what for you, why does the taking down of the white Jesus matter to the two of you? Why is this an important question for the two of you?
Who wants to go first? Destiny?
Sorry.
There you go.
It's all good.
I don't know if I was disappearing or not, but like you. So for me personally, and it's crazy, before the beginning of this year, before Lee told me that you were going to come on and talk about white Jesus, my cousin and I'm gonna call it a debate, but it was a heated discussion. We talked about, why the importance to me that people recognize that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, because, and as you so eloquently said, now I'm like, go back and listen to what we said. And this is where I was trying to come from. It deconstructs a lot of the notion that this country was built upon, the enslavement, and then just the overarching ways that people that look like me were oppressed, and it's continued to be oppressed. And how Lee always mentions recently, the storming of the Capitol and the right to do that because you're doing it in the name of Jesus, their white Jesus. And so it, and also how even we get to touch upon this today, but like, even when people do recognize or depict Black Jesus, it's always the Jesus at the cross. It's never, the liberator Jesus or the divine Jesus. It's always the oppressive Jesus, Jesus with the sad eyes, with the thorn on his head. So just like you said, the imagination and what that means, and the importance for people to recognize, people of color, that Jesus was a liberator. Jesus was political. Jesus was not someone, like you said, that just was surfer, long blonde, Swedish appearing person that just came to be, I don't know, the reconciler for all. So.
And for me, I grew up being terrified of pictures of Jesus. My grandmother had one in her house, and it was in this little room. It was kind of dark, and there was a light on it. And growing up, I used to have recurring nightmares. I had really bad nightmares, and it would always be me being chased by somebody with long hair and a beard. And so I had this I'd never liked looking at pictures of Jesus. It was always very scary for me. And then whenever I went to college, it was the first time I ever saw the first time I ever saw an artistic depiction of a non-white Jesus. And it was a picture of a very ambiguous person that wasn't muscular, that wasn't white. And I had always seen pictures of, I've always had body image issues, and that's always been my story. And seeing something that wasn't the epitome of perfection, that I could look at a picture of the incarnate God that I followed, and I didn't see somebody that was just a perfect example of what a humanity was. Like, that is not what the incarnation was. And so when that happened, it was a big release for me, because of, more so than I ever thought it would be, that I saw something that kind of opened my eyes to a faith that doesn't deal in perfection, that it doesn't deal in always like talking about salvation, and that I had to like overcome these feelings that are seen as imperfect. And so I think art is very, very powerful. And I get, wanting to see yourself in God, and that balance of, this is not the only one, but at the same time, as Jessica says, the ways in which it has been utilized and the ideology behind it. But I'll never forget that moment. And I wrote my master's thesis about this, because it was such impactful for me to see an image that I could say, this does not represent perfection. And this does not represent something that I always have to be guilty or live up to. And then as I grew into, wanting to study theology, I started deconstructing the white Jesus and what that meant, and not just like a body image thing, but it was kind of a more intersectional, that all of our bodies encompass our sexualities, our ethnicities, all of these intersectionalities. But I think it's very, very important, because if you see something every day growing up, you don't realize the impact it has on the way in which you see God. And it does play. And you watch movies. The Passion of the Christ scared the hell out of me. And all of these things that you're opened up to different artistic interpretations that really open your mind up a lot. And so I think it's very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. We don't get the tables turned on us very often. Nice. But Jessica, thank you so much for being with us. And Destiny, it's always good to see you. I see, and I will say this, and this is not me sucking up destiny, but to see God and everybody on this show and all of God's manifestations is a gift and a blessing. And so I hope it is a blessing for whoever's watching. So until next week, we will see you then.
Yes.